All right, so this is our first formula for this section on using formulas. And the distance formula says distance equals rate times time. And so another word that you need to be a little bit familiar with is sometimes instead of rate, you're going to see the word velocity. So rate and velocity all have to do with speed, like how fast is something traveling. And so you might see either one of those words. I believe on IXL you're going to see velocity all the time. In your book you're going to see rate. But they both are referring to the speed that something is going. So when you write this formula, you're going to write it like this. It's just going to be real short. You're using the first letter of each word to stand for each word. And it's D equals RT. And remember, when two things are written next to each other, it means multiply. So R and T being next to each other means you're going to multiply those two things. Now, a lot of times they're going to ask you to find the distance when we use this formula. But sometimes they're going to ask us to find the rate or the time. So we're going to make our formulas for each one of those too, okay? So if they're asking you to find rate or velocity, it's going to be R equals D over T. And what does a fraction mean? Divide. So if they're giving you the rate, then you're going to have to divide to find what is missing. Oh my goodness, sorry for all the notifications. And then if they're asking you to find the time, you're also going to have to divide, but this time it would be distance divided by the rate or the velocity. Okay? So those are the three formulas you're going to need for this one formula. And basically it's the same formula, it's just you're solving for a different letter. All right? That's why they look different. Okay, so we have this example that Holden traveled 120 miles to Daytona. It took him 4 hours to get there. How fast was he going? So when it asks us how fast something was going, that's talking about the rate or the velocity, which you could also call the speed. The amount of time it took him, not the amount of time, the rate that he was traveling, okay? So sometimes you can get the distance and the rate confused because they're both in miles, but Holden brought up a really good point. He said when we're talking about how fast or the speed, we're talking about miles per hour. So if you see that miles per hour, you're knowing that we're talking about rate. Okay, so let's go ahead and plug in what we know. So I know the distance that he traveled is how far? 120 miles. And I know the time, right? 4 hours. So what do I need to know? Which letter in our formula do I not know? The R. So I'm going to use the formula that starts with R equals, which is this one right here. So R equals 120, my distance, good, divided by 4, which is my time. Nice. And then what is 120 divided by 4? What's 12 divided by 4? 3. So what's 120 divided by 4? 30. Holden was traveling 30 miles an hour. Wow, Holden, you drive really slow. I think you would drive a little bit faster than that. Wow, yeah. I don't want to ride with Holden. That's too slow. Okay, so he was traveling 30 miles per hour, and that's what we're looking for. So over the next few days, we're going to really do a lot more of these distance formula problems, and you're going to become more familiar with how to do it and how to figure out which piece is which. The second formula we're going to learn this week is the perimeter of a rectangle. And the perimeter of a rectangle is P, which stands for perimeter, equals length plus width plus length plus width. Now, on a rectangle, because you have a length here and a length here and a width there and a width there. That's why we're just adding all the sides together. Sometimes you might see this formula like P equals S plus S plus S plus S. That just means side, like you're adding all the sides up. And sometimes you'll see this formula written like this. 2 times the length plus the width, because we have 2 lengths and we have 2 widths. So we could just add 1 length and 1 width together and then multiply them by 2, and that will give us a perimeter. So that formula is a little bit simpler if it makes sense to you. I always actually preferred this one because it just made more sense to me. So whichever one you like best. Okay, so here's an example. It tells us that the length is 11 inches. Well, if the top length is 11 inches, how long is the bottom length?
The bottom length of L?
Yeah.
11.
It's also 11 inches. And if the width is 5 inches over here, how much is the width over here? Also 5 inches. Because we have a rectangle, that means the opposite sides are equal. So now you can use either formula you want. You could either write P equals 11 plus 5 plus 11 plus 5 and solve it. Or we can use the other formula. We could write P.
So it's 32?
Yes. We can write P equals 2 times and then just add 1 length and 1 side together. So I'm going to solve both of them to show you how it goes. If we're doing the bottom one first, remember, order of operations says I have to do what first? I have to do parentheses first. Remember? Parentheses first. Exponents next. Remember that? PEMDAS? Okay, so first I'm going to do 11 plus 5, which is 16. And then I'm going to multiply that by 2, which Jerry already said is 32. And I'm going to write my units there because they did give us units. So whenever they give you the units, you should write that in your answer. All right, so there's that one if you're choosing to use that formula. And then let's solve the other one and see if we get the same answer. So if we add these together, I think I'll add the 11s and the 5s. So what is 11 plus 11?
22.
And what is 5 plus 5? 10. And then 22 plus 10? 32. Or you could use your calculator, of course. All right, and so that we got the same answer. We used 2 different formulas. We got the same answer because they're the same idea. Okay? Okay, so now we're going to talk about finding area. Perimeter talks about adding all the sides of a shape up. Area talks about the space inside the shape. So it's asking basically how much room is in here. Okay, and does anybody remember the units for area? So for example, if our units are inches, when we write our answer, we're going to write it in inches squared. Okay, because area is square feet or square inches or square miles. Area is always written as a square. So you'll see that when we do our example. So let's do, again, we're going to use the same numbers. We're going to use 11 inches for the length, and we're going to use 5 inches for the width. And we're just going to plug it in, and we're going to say area equals 11 times 5. Either use a dot or parentheses for your times. Do not use an X because it looks like a variable. So what is 11 times 5, people?
55.
Good. 55, and I'm going to write it as inches squared. So the area of this rectangle is 55 inches squared. What was the perimeter from the last problem?
Oh,
32 inches. So the area seems like it's taking up more space just because we're measuring the inside of it and not just the edge of it. All right, so the directions for these first two examples from the book tell us to find the area and perimeter of each rectangle. So I have to use two formulas to do these problems. So first, let's find perimeter, because I always do perimeter first. I don't know why. And perimeter is just adding up all the sides and finding out what it equals. Okay, remember, if this side is 3 feet, so is this side. And if this side is 8 feet, so is that side. So that's where I got those numbers from. So now if I add, what's 8 plus 8? 16. And what's 3 plus 3? 6. And then what is 16 plus 6? 22. 22 is correct. And our unit for this one is what? Feet. Good. So the perimeter of this rectangle is 22 feet. Let's find the area. So area just equals, remember, length times width. So my length is how much?
8.
Yeah, and my width is 3. And remember, I'm multiplying, so I'm going to use parentheses to show multiplication. And what is 8 times 3? 24. And we're going to write that unit in feet squared. So the area of this rectangle is 24 square feet. Now, you will very rarely get the same number for perimeter and area. So if you got the same answer for both, you might want to check your work. You might have done something wrong. I want you to try number 5 on your own, and then I'll come back and show you the answer. Okay, so what you should have gotten for number 5 is the perimeter equals 34 kilometers, and then the area equals 30 kilometers squared. So pause and copy that down and make sure you understand how to do that, and I'll be right back. Okay, so for number 7, they give us this rectangle, and I can see the L is 12 inches. I can see a W over here by itself, and then they tell me the perimeter equals 32 inches. So I'm going to use that formula to find the missing piece. Okay, so I'm going to plug everything in that I know, and then we're going to solve and find what's missing. So the P is how much? 32. The L is how much? How much is the L? Yeah, 12. And then plus the W, because we don't know what W is. Now, we have to solve this equation. And it's a little tricky to solve it. It might be easier for you if you would rather do the one that looks like this. You can just plug in the 32 for P, the 12 for the L, and leave the W's like that. And it might be easier for you to solve it like that, but either one will work. So I'm going to show you how to do this first one. So because the 12 plus W is in parentheses, I first have to get rid of that little 2 in front of the parentheses. So I'm going to distribute. I'm going to distribute that 2 so I can solve. So 2 times 12 is?
24.
Thank you. And 2 times W? 2W. Yeah, because it's just 2 times. Okay, and now add or subtract first. So I'm going to subtract 24 from both sides. And 32 minus 24 is 8.